Rivals do not always fall by sword or scandal. Most die quietly, forgotten, unfade, unseen. Power does not destroy by confrontation, it destroys by deprivation. To starve a rival's relevance is to suffocate their influence without ever drawing blood. It is the cleanest form of domination, silent, strategic, irreversible. Ask yourself, why engage the enemy when neglect can bury them more effectively than war? A rival feeds on attention, on acknowledgement, on conflict. Every time you react, argue, or retaliate, you water the roots of their relevance. They thrive not on victory but on recognition. So, you must master the dark art of deliberate indifference. To ignore is not to surrender. It is to dominate in silence. When the Roman Senate feared the rise of Cato the Younger, they could not destroy him openly. His reputation for moral virtue was too strong. Instead, they isolated him, excluded him from decisions, withheld information, and allowed his words to echo into empty rooms. His influence decayed not because he was wrong, but because no one was listening. That is how power works. It does not argue with dissent, it outlives it. Your rivals will crave your reaction. They will test your ego, bait your pride, provoke your need to respond. They know that once you engage, you place yourself on equal ground, and equality is poison to authority. Do not descend. Rise in silence. When you ignore them, you rob them of the oxygen they need to burn. Power grows in asymmetry. When your presence is vast and theirs invisible, the sun does not argue with the shadow, it merely shines until the shadow disappears. In modern terms, the same principle rules the digital and political arenas. Notice how the most powerful figures rarely address their critics directly. They understand that acknowledgement gives weight. To reply is to elevate. To stay silent is to define who truly matters. Even in psychology, this tactic has a name: social starvation. Humans are wired to seek recognition. When it is denied, frustration festers. They question their worth, their voice, their position. Their need for validation turns inward, consuming them. You don't destroy them. They destroy themselves in the silence you create. But to wield this power effectively, you must master restraint. The ego always whispers, prove them wrong. The strategist answers, let them vanish unprovoked. Learn from Talleyrand, the master diplomat of Napoleon's court. When accused, insulted, or challenged, he rarely replied. He smiled faintly and said, "It is worse than a crime. It is a mistake." Then he continued as if nothing had happened. His silence humiliated more than any argument could, because silence is not weakness, it is superiority performed. This is psychological warfare at its purest. Every word you withhold becomes a weapon. Every reaction you deny becomes a mirror that reflects your rival's insignificance. Eventually, they will exhaust themselves trying to pull you into conflict. They will shout louder, act bolder, scheme harder. But the more desperate they become, the smaller they appear. And the crowd, ever drawn to strength, will turn away from noise and follow calm authority. Never forget, influence is perception, not truth. Once a rival appears desperate, their truth no longer matters. By starving them of attention, you redefine their identity. They cease to be an opponent, they become irrelevant background noise. You can see this in everyday life. A colleague who constantly challenges you loses power when you respond with quiet detachment. A public critic fades when you offer no reply. Even in relationships, the one who withdraws first gains control. Because absence breeds imbalance, and imbalance breeds authority. This strategy requires patience. The results are slow, invisible, but permanent. Destruction through neglect is not dramatic. It is surgical. In the court of power, visibility is life. So when you deny someone the light, you condemn them to obscurity. Do not waste your energy tearing them down. Simply remove your gaze, and they will crumble beneath their own need to be seen. The cruelest punishment is not exile. It is indifference. Understand this, no one can fight what the world refuses to see. When you stop acknowledging a rival, their existence begins to dissolve. First in perception, then in reality. But there is one rule to remember. You must remain visible while they fade. To starve them, you must still feast on attention. Silence them publicly, but feed your presence privately through quiet dominance and relentless action. You are not escaping conflict. You are erasing competition. That is the true elegance of power, not in crushing your enemies, but in making the world forget they ever existed. And once the stage is yours alone, another art must begin. The art of emotional control, where isolation becomes your shield and your weapon. Power is not only seized through strategy, it is maintained through emotional control, and control begins where attachment ends. Isolation is not just physical separation, it is psychological insulation. It is the art of denying others access to your emotional core, because the moment they touch your emotions, they begin to command your reactions. Ask yourself, how many times have you lost ground not through defeat, but through anger? How many times have you revealed too much too soon, simply because you felt too deeply? Emotion is the lever by which others move you. Detach that lever, and you become immovable. The wise strategist does not suppress emotion, he conceals it. He feels, but does not display. He observes, but does not absorb. That is isolation as emotional warfare. When you withdraw your emotions, you create uncertainty, and uncertainty, in power, is terror. Consider Frederick the Great of Prussia. His officers feared him not for his rage, but for his composure. When others expected fury, he gave silence. When they expected praise, he gave nothing. No one could predict his temperament, and so they feared it. They adjusted themselves around his calm, for unpredictability is a ruler's invisible weapon. People are addicted to emotional reaction. They crave it because it gives them relevance. When you react, you validate their existence. When you withdraw, you remind them of their insignificance. That is emotional starvation, and it can dismantle opponents faster than open confrontation. In psychology, it is known as the gray rock method, the art of becoming uninteresting to those who seek to provoke you. A manipulator thrives on reaction. Starve them of it, and they suffocate in their own frustration. But the Machiavellian mind goes further. You don't just deny emotion, you use it strategically. Imagine this in conflict. Everyone expects retaliation. But you answer with calm, measured, detached, surgical. Your silence becomes louder than any scream. Your stillness becomes the storm they cannot predict. This confuses the emotional rhythm of others. They begin to doubt their own influence. They wonder what you're thinking, plotting, preparing. And in that uncertainty, your power multiplies. Emotional isolation does not mean you feel nothing. It means you decide when to feel and for whom. When Queen Elizabeth I ruled England, she kept her court and her suitors guessing. She mastered emotional distance so perfectly that her indecision became a form of dominance. Every noble desired her approval, her affection, her clarity. But she gave none freely. Her restraint became her crown. They called her the Virgin Queen. But in truth, she was married to control itself. She understood that the one who reveals the least controls the most. To isolate emotionally is to make your mind a fortress. No one enters without permission. No one exits without purpose. But beware, this kind of power requires discipline, because emotional isolation is seductive. Once you taste the strength of detachment, you may begin to crave it. You may start to see connection as weakness, empathy as exposure. And that too is dangerous. A ruler too cold becomes despised. A mind too distant becomes paranoid. So you must master balance, the art of appearing warm, yet being untouchable. Smile when it serves you, listen when it disarms. But let no one see the strings behind your calm. Emotional control is not about building walls. It is about constructing mirrors. Let them see their own reflection when they try to reach you. Confuse them with their own emotions. Make them believe your calm is compassion, your silence is agreement, your patience is trust. And when the time comes to act, strike without warning, without emotion, without remorse. History remembers those who used isolation not as retreat, but as design. Napoleon studied alone for hours before campaigns, removing all emotional interference. When his generals panicked, he remained unmoved. That calm became contagious. His army mirrored his steadiness. Isolation made his focus lethal. The same applies to you. In moments of tension, when everyone else breaks into chaos, your silence becomes command. They will look to you, not because you speak, but because you don't. That is the paradox of emotional isolation. You distance yourself to draw others in. They will seek your approval because they cannot read your indifference. They will fear losing what they cannot fully possess. Your calm, your clarity, your control. In the game of power, emotion is currency. Spend it too freely and you become poor. Withhold it wisely and you become priceless. So remember, never fight with emotion. Weaponize it, guard it. Hide it until the moment it becomes most devastating. For the one who controls emotion controls perception. And perception, as you will soon see, is the foundation of all fortresses. Every rival you tolerate is a seed of your own downfall. Power decays not because of weakness, but because of proximity. Too many voices near the throne. Today, you will learn the art of isolation, not as loneliness, but as strategy. For only in calculated solitude does true power become untouchable. In every hierarchy, from empires to boardrooms, power is never taken. It is constructed piece by piece through the removal of obstacles disguised as allies. The wise ruler does not fear isolation, he engineers it. To isolate is to purify your circle of influence until only your will remains uncontested. The Nava call it cruelty. The strategist calls it consolidation. You must learn to silence the noise, to detach from those who leech your vision under the mask of loyalty. This is not about cutting people off. It is about elevating yourself beyond their reach. In the theater of power, presence is influence, absence is control. Let us explore how isolation becomes the architect of domination. Power begins to die the moment it becomes familiar. Closer they stand to you, the more they start to see your flaws, your hesitations, your humanity. And that is fatal to authority. You must learn to rule not by presence, but by controlled distance. Do you know why kings build thrones higher than everyone else? It is not for comfort. It is for perception. The height is psychological, a silent reminder that they exist in another dimension of power. When you are too near, you become ordinary. When you are too distant, you become a myth. The balance between those two, that is where control lies. In every court, every company, every circle of influence, there are those who confuse closeness with strength. They think being approachable makes them beloved. But power does not need to be loved. It needs to be believed in. A wise ruler learns to be visible enough to command loyalty, but distant enough to remain untouchable. Think of Caesar. Before his fall, he allowed too many hands to reach for him. Senators, generals, supposed friends. He sat among them, laughed with them, trusted them. But when familiarity entered the room, reverence escaped. They no longer saw a god, they saw a man. And men can be killed. Controlled distance would have saved him. This principle is as psychological as it is strategic. The human mind, when denied constant access, begins to idealize. Distance creates projection, and projection is power. When they cannot fully reach you, they invent a version of you that suits their need to believe. They fill in the gaps with admiration, fear, or curiosity. And that illusion, if maintained correctly, is stronger than any truth you could reveal. Ask yourself, do they see you, or do they perceive you? The difference defines whether you lead or follow. Controlled distance means speaking less, observing more. It means letting silence do what words cannot. People trust their own interpretations far more than your explanations. So let them build your legend in their minds while you remain a mystery. Psychology calls this the scarcity effect. What is less available becomes more valuable. Attention works the same way as gold. Too much circulation, and its worth collapses. In leadership, you must ration yourself like a rare currency. The moment you are constantly accessible, replying, explaining, defending, you surrender the throne of perception. You step down into the crowd and beg for recognition, and no one fears the beggar who once sat on a throne. Even in modern life, this law applies. The boss who joins every conversation becomes a peer, not a leader. The influencer who shares every thought loses the mystery that made them magnetic. The lover who is always available becomes invisible to desire. Controlled distance turns attention into hunger. Hunger turns into fascination. Fascination turns into influence. It is not cruelty, it is design. History's most enduring figures understood this art instinctively. Consider Napoleon. He did not attend every council. He made his presence felt through letters, through symbols, through silence that compelled others to wonder what he was thinking. The fewer his words, the heavier their weight. Distance magnified him. Even in psychological warfare, generals used this principle. They concealed movements, spoke in riddles, appeared unpredictable. To control distance is to control the tempo of perception. And perception is the currency of power. But distance must never turn into detachment. Too much absence breeds suspicion, too much familiarity breeds contempt. You must remain close enough to ignite loyalty, but distant enough to preserve awe. Imagine standing in a dimly lit room. The flame is visible, but untouchable. Its light warms, but its heat warns. That is how your presence should feel. Let them see your fire, but never hand them the torch. Controlled distance is also emotional. Never reveal your full frustration, your pain, your joy. The moment your emotions become readable, others begin to predict you. And once they can predict you, they can control you. Stay slightly unpredictable. Withdraw when they expect you to react. Speak when they expect your silence. Confuse their rhythm, and they will adjust to yours. Remember, proximity breeds audacity. The closer they think they are to you, the bolder their ambition becomes. So you must build an invisible hierarchy, not through titles, but through energy. A calm, calculated presence that demands distance even in the same room. The true Machiavellian does not isolate to hide. He isolates to amplify. Every step back adds gravity to the next move forward. Because when you finally choose to appear, every word, every gesture, every silence will carry the weight of absence, the mystery of distance, and the power of control. And that is how you rule without touching the throne. But remember, once distance is mastered, another challenge begins. For isolation breeds dependency, and dependency breeds dominion. Power does not thrive in equality. It thrives in hierarchy, in the subtle imbalance where others lean toward you for stability, direction, and validation. When everyone around you feels equal, they feel entitled. But when they depend on you, they obey. Dependence is the invisible chain that binds men without their knowing. It does not humiliate them. It comforts them. It makes them feel protected, even as it steals their freedom one decision at a time. Ask yourself, do people follow you because they respect you, or because they need you? Respect fades, need endures. To rule effectively, you must make others dependent on your presence, your approval, your resources. Whatever currency they value most. It is not enough to be admired. You must be necessary. This is the architecture of control. Consider the great rulers of history. When Louis XVI centralized power in France, he made the nobles dependent not through threats, but through proximity to privilege. He invited them to his court at Versailles, dazzling them with luxury, distracting them with vanity, and making them fight for crumbs of his attention. They thought themselves honored, but they were caged, gilded prisoners orbiting the Sun King. That is the genius of dependency. It enslaves through desire, not fear. Even in the modern world, this principle rules. Corporations do not need to dominate their workers through force. They create dependence through incentives, comfort, recognition, lifestyle. You work, not because you must, but because you fear losing what your comfort has become addicted to. Dependency breeds control because it rewires the human mind. Psychology calls it intermittent reinforcement. Give people what they crave, but not always. Reward them unpredictably. Withhold approval just long enough for them to chase it again. You become their storm and their shelter. And soon, their peace depends on you. This is not manipulation in the crude sense. It is orchestration. You are shaping the environment in which power flows toward you naturally. Do not make the mistake of believing equality leads to harmony. It leads to rebellion. When people see themselves as your equal, they begin to question your authority. They believe their ideas are as valuable as yours. And once they believe that, you have already lost. Equality is not the foundation of leadership. It is the beginning of revolt. So maintain hierarchy, but veil it in grace. Let them feel heard, but never empowered. Let them speak, but reserve the final word. Let them advise, but remind them subtly that their success depends on your permission. This balance, appearing fair while remaining superior, is the fine art of subtle domination. Even in personal relationships, dependency governs influence. Have you noticed how the one who loves less controls more? The one who withdraws affection first dictates the pace of connection. Emotion, too, is a battlefield of dependency. When you are the source of emotional security, the other person will forgive, excuse, and defend you, even when reason says they should not. That is the power of psychological reliance. You may wonder, isn't this cruel? But cruelty implies malice. Dependency, when engineered wisely, is stability disguised as trust. To lead is to ensure the structure never collapses, and for that, people must need the architect. History rewards those who understand this. Consider Stalin. He eliminated equality within his circle by creating fear-driven loyalty. Each man near him survived only through proximity to his favor. They watched each other, mistrusted each other. But all depended on him. That dependency ensured their silence even in terror. Now, fear is one form of dependency. But there are others far more elegant. Create dependency through value. Become indispensable, the one who solves, the one who knows, the one who decides. Let your influence become a drug and make withdrawal impossible. People will not betray what they depend on. They will rationalize your dominance as guidance, your control as protection, your absence as their own failure. That is the psychology of submission disguised as loyalty. Every great strategist knows it is not enough to conquer. You must also bind. Chains made of iron break. Chains made of need endure. But take heed. Dependency is a double-edged sword. If you give too much, they will cling to you. If you take too much, they will resent you. Keep them hungry, but not hopeless. Keep them close, but not comfortable. You are not their equal. You are their axis. And as long as they revolve around you, their movement becomes your design. But beware, once you master dependency, another challenge awaits. Because the moment you silence your rivals and bind your allies, you face a new form of threat. One that does not fight openly, but fades silently. Every empire falls from within before it ever falls from without. The enemy at the gate is never as dangerous as the doubt in the mind. That is why true power begins with the fortress mindset. A state where your will becomes untouchable, your focus impregnable, your clarity unshakable. It is not the walls of stone that protect a ruler. It is the fortress built within, made of discipline, detachment, and deliberate isolation. You cannot control the world until you control the noise inside your own head. Ask yourself, how often has your ambition weakened because of another's opinion? How often have you hesitated, not because you lacked strength, but because you allowed voices from outside your walls to echo within them? That is the first vulnerability of power, permeability. A fortress leaks not when its walls are weak, but when its gates remain open to influence. The Machiavellian ruler does not barricade himself from the world. He filters it. He chooses carefully what enters and what is denied. Praise and criticism are both equally dangerous if allowed to corrupt judgment. The praise inflates, the criticism distracts. Both distort clarity. So, he learns to hear everything but absorb nothing. Consider Marcus Aurelius, a philosopher-emperor surrounded by flattery, deceit, and ambition, yet he wrote to himself, not to the world. His journal, Meditations, was his inner fortress. He ruled an empire, yet his greatest conquest was over his own mind. You must learn the same discipline, to stand in chaos and remain unshaken, to hear the storm and still choose silence. That is not detachment, that is design. The fortress mindset means building psychological walls that keep emotion and impulse outside your strategy. It means separating your reaction from your response. When insulted, do you strike back? Or do you calculate? When betrayed, do you rage? Or do you observe? When cornered, Do you panic, or do you plan? The answer defines whether you rule yourself or are ruled by circumstance. Power is not in dominance, it is in control. And control begins with inner architecture. Your mind must become a citadel that others cannot storm, a space where fear cannot reach and flattery cannot seduce. Think of Hannibal, the Carthaginian general who crossed the Alps. The Romans tried to break him through delay, exhaustion, and rumor, yet his resolve remained iron. He slept little, spoke little, trusted less. He lived within his fortress of intent, a single unwavering mission that no external chaos could penetrate. That is what the modern world lacks, a fortress of purpose. Today, influence comes not from armies but from opinions. Every word, every image, every judgment invades your thoughts. And without a fortress, you will be conquered not by enemies, but by distractions. Learn to withdraw strategically, not from ambition but from noise. Solitude, when chosen, becomes power. In silence, you sharpen vision. In isolation, you recover sovereignty over your own mind. This is not about retreat, it is about recalibration. The fortress is not a cage. It is a command center. It is where the ruler stands above emotion, looks down upon chaos, and sees patterns invisible to those still trapped inside it. To think clearly is to see further. To see further is to dominate silently. Even in the modern psychological sense, the fortress mindset reflects emotional intelligence at its highest form. It is metacognition, the ability to think about your thoughts, to observe without being consumed by them. The more you understand your mind, the fewer can manipulate it. Because manipulation always begins with intrusion. If they can enter your emotions, they can steer your behavior. If they can plant doubt, they can weaken your will. So close the gates. Guard your attention as a ruler guards the treasury. Every moment of focus you spend on trivial things is gold given to your rivals. Your peace must be selective. Your silence must be strategic. Your isolation must be intelligent. And when the world cannot reach you, it cannot predict you. Unpredictability is the moat around your power. Those outside will guess your moves, misread your motives, misunderstand your methods. And that confusion is your shield. The fortress mindset is not loneliness, it is elevation. It is the vantage point from which you see what others cannot. The battlefield beneath your calm. Do not mistake stillness for weakness. Stillness is stored energy. It is the eye of the storm, the moment before command, the pause before the strike. Because when you finally emerge from your fortress, your clarity will cut through deception like a blade through silk. And every rival, every manipulator, every whispering voice will realize too late. You were never hiding, you were building. But remember this: once your fortress stands, you face a new dilemma: how to project power beyond your walls without ever leaving them. Control is never taken by force alone. It is taken through understanding, through the quiet manipulation of perception. You do not dominate by shouting. You dominate by shaping what others believe to be their own choice. That is the essence of unseen control: to guide without appearing to lead, to command without raising a hand. Every word you speak, every silence you hold, every emotion you conceal, these are the levers of invisible power. Ask yourself, would you rather be feared for what you do openly, or obeyed for what they never realize you're doing at all? The wise do not reveal their methods. They let others believe it was destiny, while every move was design. Now, the game is yours to play. Guard your mind, shape perception, and let no one see the strings you pull. If this spoke to your darker intellect, leave your thoughts below. Subscribe for more strategies of silent dominance. And share this video, so others may think they understand power, while you truly master it.